There you go. I didn't interrupt you this time.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks, Kelly.
you're welcome.
Uh, so thank you all for joining us this morning. I'd like to welcome you all here today. For new folks joining us online, my name is Alexandria Scott. I am the East Region Public Engagement Coordinator. So in that role, a lot of my work is focused in the Harney Basin. But for the purposes of today's meeting, I will be your facilitator. This is a 1-hour session in a series of sessions that the Oregon Water Resources Department will be running through August as part of our Division 512 rulemaking educational support. So this was a request from our Rules Advisory Committee and the community to provide an extra learning resource as we start to enter rulemaking conversations starting in August. So these sessions will be recorded. And as Kelly mentioned earlier, they will be made available on our Division 512 splash page. We'll post the link to that page in the chat for you all. But recordings will be available within 1 to 2 days of each session. A couple ground rules before we get started. I'm going to ask that people hold their questions until after the presentation is done. You're welcome to put those questions in the chat so you don't lose them if you want. And then as we move to the Q&A session, I'll ask folks to use the hand raising function, or you can physically raise your hand. I know sometimes it's hard to find the button in the moment, so you're welcome to also raise your hand, and we'll try to call on folks in the order that we receive those. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to our presenters for today.
Hey, y'all. I'll introduce myself and I'll pass over to my second presenter. So my name is Kelly Mines. I am the rule writer, rule coordinator, and a policy analyst for the Oregon Department of Water Resources. I'm in charge of coordinating the Harney Basin Division 512 rulemaking update. I'll pass it on to my presenter to introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody. Ivan Gall with the Water Resources Department, Acting Deputy Director for the Water Management here in the agency. It's great to see everybody, and I look forward to the presentation.
Okay, so today we are going to talk about a groundwater management tool that we have called the Serious Water Management Problem Area. Last week we talked about the classification, and the week before that we did an overview of the groundwater study. We did 2 videos. One, we did an informational session with kind of a shorter presentation, and then we prepared a more in-depth learning session where our groundwater scientist Jerry went through the entire aspect of the report. So if you're interested, as Alexandra said, it's on our Division 512 splash page. But without further ado, let's get into SWMPA. So before we do that, though, sorry, I just say let's get into SWMPA, and then we're not talking about SWMPA yet. Let's talk about all of the regulatory groundwater control tools that the department has available to them. We're going to start at the very top of this table here, the withdrawal of unappropriate waters. This is out of scope for the Division 512 rulemaking. And so what this is withdrawals unappropriate waters from appropriation. In other words, in the state, any unpromised water that has not been allocated through the water right process, the commission could withdraw that from any future appropriation. And that controls future groundwater use. It does not affect any present use. So if someone in that area has been promised water, they continue to have that water. The next tool going down here, the bottom here, is classification of water. We talked about this last week. This is a tool that the department has available that allows within the area. So let's say Harney County, we established the Greater Harney Valley Groundwater Area of Concern, or the GIVGAC, back in 2016. Ivan and Dwight French were a part of that. Within the GIVGAC, we classified that area to, we say, a classification allows us to say allow the type of water to be used, and then we can also specify the amount of water to be used. So within the GIVGAC, we classify that for exempt uses only. So again, classification allows us to classify an area for the type of use that is allowed, and then we can also define how much water for lack of a better word, define how much water of that use can be used, and that's the classification tool. Today, we're going to be on this third box down here, we're going to be talking about the Serious Water Management Problem Area, or a SWMPA. It's really fun to say. I'm going to be using SWMPA, but a SWMPA means a Serious Water Management Problem Area. This isn't necessarily a groundwater control tool. It's more of a tool that requires reporting and measurement of water use. This could be used either for surface water or groundwater for Harney County specifically. It's going to be measurement of groundwater use. And so that allows us to measure present and future groundwater use. The next one we'll be talking about, this is going to be week 5 of our informational session, is a critical groundwater area designation, or our Division 10 rules that we will get adopted in Harney September 28th. But what this tool allows us to do, and this is actually very important, this is the only tool that allows us to control present use. So what a critical groundwater area designation is that an area in the state meets a certain criteria under the statutes, and one of those criteria could be a pattern of substantial interference between wells. So if we find, for example, a pattern of substantial interference, we can initiate a critical groundwater area designation process, which is through rulemaking, and that's what we're doing with the Division 512. And then once we get those rules adopted, that area is then designated a critical groundwater area. And then from there, we can go and initiate a contested case to control groundwater use within users of that critical groundwater area. And so we're going to be doing a lot more in depth on week 5 of what that means and what's required. It's a very robust system that the department, it's a series of hoops that the department needs to jump through to get that designation. So the last tool on this page here is a groundwater mitigation area. This is out of scope for Division 512. And this affects groundwater allocation into the Deschutes Basin. And this is only for the Deschutes Basin. And this was established, the groundwater mitigation area of the Deschutes, to my understanding, was established, I think it was like early 1992. There was a law that established the mitigation area, and we used that tool to control future groundwater use within the Deschutes Basin. Okay, so these are tools. So just to summarize up, right? Withdrawal of unappropriate waters. We take away any unpromised waters. We withdraw them from any future appropriation. Classification of water. We define what type of use could be used in an area and how much of that could be used. We have a serious water management problem area, what we're talking about today. A SWMPA, that is requirement for reporting and measurement of use. We have a critical groundwater area designation. That is helping us control present groundwater use through a robust system of designating an area. We have the groundwater mitigation area that's specifically for the Deschutes Basin, and now is out of 512 rulemaking. 2 other tools that we have available. Hold on, it's not changing on me. There we go. 2 other tools that we have available. We can regulate to permit conditions. So if somebody is pumping too much water that they are under their permit, then we can regulate to that. And then not so much a regulatory tool, but more of a voluntary tool. We have voluntary agreements. We'll be talking about this next week, but in a voluntary agreement, by statute, just a definition is an agreement between groundwater users within the same groundwater system. And we'll be going more in depth that next week. So why are we doing all these informational sessions? Starting last April, we kicked off the Rules Advisory Committee process for updating the Harney County Division 512 rules. We formed a RAC of 32 individuals. A RAC is just a Rules Advisory Committee, and what that means is just a group of affected people likely to be affected by the rules. We are doing this process through January 2024. Our next RAC number 2 will be August 29th. It's coming up here in a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. And then from there, starting in February 2024, we'll start doing public comment and noticing the public. We'll be holding public hearings in Harney County. And then in July 2024, we'll take all of the comments. We will, if there's a comment that we like, that's a good comment, then we will go to the rules and change language in the rules or draft a Water Resource Commission report. And then hopefully in September 2024, we'll get the rules adopted for the Division 512 rules. Note that this is subject to change. Things are always moving in the water world, as we all know. So it could either be earlier than September, later in September, hopefully not later in September, but this is what we have planned right now. So let's get into SWMPA now. Let's get more in depth into the Serious Water Management Problem Area, or SWMPA. So statutes RS 540.435 authorizes the commission to establish a serious water management problem area, or a SWMPA. And a establishment of a SWMPA may require any water right owner to install a totalizing measuring device or any surface water or groundwater source. It may require submission of an annual water use report, and then also and also can give the water master the water master may prohibit water use by anyone who fails to comply. And so really what this tool does, it provides more accountability for water use within the designated SWMPA area. And so there are criteria that need to be met in order for a SWMPA designation to happen, right? So the first one, starting at this top one here, if the commission wants to designate an area of a SWMPA, they need to identify that one of the criteria for a designation has been met. And we're going to get more in depth and talk about those criteria in the next couple of slides. This is kind of the overview. We need to also hold a public hearing. And then after that public hearing, we need to allow time for alternate proposals for metering, data gathering, reporting formats. It's about 30 days. And then from there, we need to adopt rules with specific SWMPA language, which is another whole set of requirements that we need to have within the rule language. And we're going to get into that too. So again, takeaways. One, it needs to meet a criteria for why a SWMPA is designated. Two, we need to hold a public hearing. Three, we need to allow, after the public hearing, time for alternate proposals to be submitted. And then four, we need to have rules adopted with specific SWMPA language. So let's get into these criteria here, starting with that top bullet point there. So by statute and by our Division 85 rules, there are specific conditions that one of these conditions need to be met for a SWMPA designation. So the top one here, groundwater declines are occurring and don't recover annually. There are frequent water management disputes between users. Substantial interference exists between wells. Groundwater use is interfering with flow of water in a nearby stream to the detriment of a senior surface water rights holder. The diversion of water from stream is in such quantities that the interference with nearby wells occurs. And lastly, there are frequent shortages of surface or groundwater. So just one of these criteria, or criterion if they're multiple, need to be met for a SWMPA designation. Okay, so in terms of the public hearing, what the department needs to do, or the commission needs to do, is one, we need to notify the public with the local newspaper within 2 weeks before the public hearing. And then when feasible, we need to mail all water rights holders within the proposed SWMPA area that we are doing a public hearing. And that hearing must be held in the proposed area for designation. So this is just the baseline requirements. The department will likes to do more than just notify local newspapers. We've heard from the community, and we will be doing that. The next one, for the requirements for alternative proposals here. So after the meeting, a affected person has 30 days after the public hearing to submit alternative proposals. So that the alter proposal provides the information necessary to manage the water resources or to alleviate the water management problem. An affected person is someone within the SWMPA designated area, and they can come to us and say, hey, I want to they provide an alternate proposal to what we are proposing for a totalizing flow measurement device, or the criteria for a totalizing flow measurement device. So a person has 30 days after the public hearing to submit an alternate proposal. So criteria, right? So in order for a SWMPA to go back here, right? Just want to kind of nail this home. So there are 4 different criteria for a SWMPA designation to happen. One of those, the list of 6 criteria that I talked about, need to be met. We need to hold a public hearing within the proposed area, and we need to post in the newspaper 2 weeks before. We need to allow for alternative proposals 30 days after the public hearing. And lastly, we need to adopt the rules. So let's kind of quickly get into those rules. A rule designating a SWMPA has specific components that we need to have written within the rules. So in this case, it's going to be in the Division 512 Harney County rules. We're going to have this kind of language written in. So the SWMPA language needs to specify the nature of the problem and needs to define the boundaries of the area involved. It needs to specify who is required to install measuring devices, and needs to define specifications for the types of measuring devices that must be installed. It needs to specify annual reporting requirements, and lastly, provide a timeline for implementation. So within the Division 512 rules, or within any kind of rules that designate an area SWMPA, these 6 components need to be contained within the rule written language. So we recognize that requiring users to install totalizing flow measures has some economic impact on them. So the department does have a water measurement cost sharing program that the OWRD will cover 50 to 75% of the cost of the flow measurement device. I'm aware right now that there is a program in Harney County for voluntary flow measurements. So it's going to be similar to that. And so from there, we're going to pass it on to Ivan, and he's going to talk about the only SWMPA we have in the state, the Walla Walla. So go ahead, Ivan.
Thanks, Kelly. So I've got about a dozen slides or so to go through here, and we'll touch on basically the components of what Kelly just talked about in a generic sense with respect to the Walla Walla subbasin here in Oregon, where we do have, that's our only existing serious water management problem area right now. So next slide, please. So again, the Walla Walla Basin was the first time that we've designated a serious water management problem area. Why did we do that? Well, we've had in that basin, it's a little bit different than the hydrogeology in the Harney Basin. There's a sand and gravel or alluvial aquifer system that's overlying a series of basalt aquifers in there. And in the basalt aquifer system, we've had some pretty significant groundwater level declines over the years. So in order to better understand how much groundwater was being pumped out of these basalt systems, we decided to implement the SWMPA designation there to require measuring for the basalt wells and the basalt groundwater production there to start gathering that data. So in the future, we'll be able to get a correlation between groundwater level responses versus groundwater use and be able to help manage the basin there. That was a criterion. We held a public hearing in the Walla Walla Basin. Alternative proposals were accepted and reviewed prior to the rule adoption, and then those rules were adopted in 2017. Next slide. So we'll go a little bit into the rule language here and kind of walk through that so you can see an example of what some of the SWMPA language might look like in the Harney Basin. Next slide, please. So for the Malheur Lakes Administrative Basin, we're talking about the Division 512 rules. For the Walla Walla subbasin there, it's the Division 507. So that's what you're seeing here. So 690-507-0030 sub 4 contains a specific language for implementation of the SWMPA in the basalt aquifers there in the Walla Walla Basin. The next slide. Here's again some examples of those rule language. The basalt well flow meter installation and groundwater use reporting. The commission establishes a serious water management problem area as shown in Exhibit 507. And I think we've got an example of that. So we're defining the boundaries. This is a map that was contained in the rules as an exhibit there. So you can see from the state line on the northern edge there, you've got a variable boundary that goes through the various townships there to define the area where the water measurement is going to be required. Next slide. So providing timelines for the implementation of the measurement there, and then who is required to install those. This is the language that we used by no later than January 1st of 2019. So remember, these rules were adopted in 2017. So we provided, I believe it was on the order of 18 months to get the flow meters installed. Each water right holder, well owner, or well operator shall properly install and thereafter properly maintain a totalizing flow meter on each basalt well within the SWMPA boundary, listed as a point of appropriation on a valid water right. And then totalizing flow meters must meet a number of specifications, and we'll talk about those, and need to be properly installed according to manufacturer specifications. So what we're doing with this rule construct is ensuring that we're selecting flow meters, devices that are going to work for the particular well setting and are going to hold up over the years. And we'll talk about these specifications here in a little bit more detail. So next slide, please. A lot of language here. This is the reporting requirement in addition to the measuring requirement. So the water right holder, well owner, or well operator shall keep a complete record of the volume of water appropriated each month and shall submit a report which includes water use measurements to the department on an annual basis by January 31st of each calendar year. So what we're doing there is we're asking folks to record their water use on a monthly basis and then submit those data to the department basically at the end of the calendar year, but no later than January 31st. I'll go on to read here. The director may request submission of reports more frequently as necessary to monitor and administer the SWMPA. Reports of water use measurement shall be submitted to the department during the month of January for the preceding year, or more frequently as required by the director. Reports shall be submitted on a form developed by the department. Next slide, please. Let's see. So defining specifications for the individual meters here. A totalizing flow meter shall meet the following specs. The flow meter shall have a rated accuracy of plus or minus 2% of actual flow for all flow rates for which the meter is expected to measure. A totalizing flow meter shall register the full range of discharge from the well. A totalizing flow meter shall have a visual and recording mechanical or digital totalizer located on or adjacent to the flow meter and shall be equipped with a sweep hand or digital readout so that instantaneous flow can be read, excuse me. So with the specifications, we want to make sure that the device that's installed to measure water use is capable of showing us the instantaneous amount or the rate that's being pumped. So if staff or the landowner walks up to the well while it's operating and being pumped, we can see how many gallons per minute are coming out. And then there's the totalizing function, which totalizes the volume of water by day, by week, by month, however frequently you want to read that. So we can track the ultimately the annual groundwater use from that basalt aquifer system there. Next slide. So totalizers on each meter shall not be field reset without notice to and written permission from the water master. So the intent here, of course, is that you don't pump for 2 weeks and then go hit the zero button and zero things out. That would not provide us the total water use that we're intending to collect from the basalt system in this case. The totalizing flow meter shall be installed in accordance with all the manufacturer specs. There shall be no turnouts or diversions between the well and the flow meter. So we want to make sure that all of the groundwater that's being pumped from a particular well runs through the flow meter system. So again, we don't want any T's in the line, discharge line, where some of the water can be shunted off to different uses and not be measured. We're again attempting to get the most accurate measurement of groundwater use we can from the particular well or system. The flow meter shall be installed not less than 5 pipe diameters downstream from any valve, elbow, or other obstruction, which might create turbulent flow, or other provisions shall be made that meet the manufacturer's specifications to control or eliminate turbulent flow. So again, to help improve the accuracy of these flow meters, the goal is to get what we call laminar flow or non-turbulent flow in the water discharge pipe. And you tend to get turbulent flow around elbows or other changes in pipe diameter. So meeting those manufacturer specifications is really important for the accuracy of the meter there. Next slide, please. Now we want to look at kind of the overall capacity of the flow meter here. So the totalizing part of the flow meter shall have sufficient capacity to record the quantity of water authorized to be pumped over a period of 2 years. Units of water measurement shall be in acre feet, cubic feet, or gallons, and the totalizer shall read directly in one of these units. Flow meters recording in acre feet shall at a minimum read to the nearest 1/10 of an acre foot, and the decibel multiplier shall be clearly indicated on the face of the register head. So this specification here in rule is designed to make sure that the flow meter accounting system, if you will, has the capacity to record at least 2 years of water use before it turns over. We've seen some flow meters that have been installed on large discharge wells where the meter actually turns itself over during one irrigation season. And so when staff come out to read the flow meter, they're not getting accurate data because they don't know when the meter turned over. And so this type of rule language is designed to make sure that that doesn't happen. Next slide, please. So what happens if folks don't follow through with these? So failure to have and maintain a properly installed functioning totalizing flow meter by January 1st, 2019 in this case, will result in the water master regulating and controlling an unmetered well such that no groundwater may be pumped or appropriated until the flow meter is obtained and installed consistent with these rules. So the intent here is that within the window of time, all the groundwater users within the SWMPA will get flow meters installed. If they're not, then the water master will take control of the wellhead and not allow groundwater to be pumped from the well until a flow meter is installed. And consistent with 536-900, Chapter 183 in our Division 260 rules, the department may assess civil penalties for violation of these rules. Next slide, please. So Kelly, you want me to run through these? So these are questions that came from the first Rule Advisory Committee meeting with respect to water use measurement and a potential SWMPA in the Harney. The first question there is surface water metering going to be required? Right now, we have no intention of measuring any surface water beyond what we're already doing in the basin with respect to the rule update in the SWMPA. Dally, the water master down there, and Jason Spreed, our region manager, have required installation of measuring devices, or the department has in the past, on some of the large surface water diversions off the Sylvies River as an example, or Silver Creek. I don't know if any more of those measuring devices are in the works right now. I didn't check in with Jason or Dally prior to this call. We certainly can require surface water metering and measuring without a SWMPA, as we've done in the past. But like I said, right now, as part of the SWMPA process, there's no intention to do some sort of a blanket or universal requirement for all points of diversion on the streams to measure. Could surface water metering be required at a later time? Yes, it could. If the department found that some sort of universal measuring of diversions from a stream or across the basin was going to help us manage water, or we needed it for some study, scientific data collection, whatever the case may be, we could add that language into the SWMPA language and expand from groundwater to surface water. But again, there's no intention of doing that at this point in time. And third question here, is a SWMPA designation ever removed from a basin? Well, so far we just have the one example that I just went through in the Walla Walla subbasin. Those rules were adopted in 2017, so about 6 years ago. We have not removed that SWMPA requirement, nor is there an intention to remove that SWMPA requirement until we get a better handle on groundwater use versus water level declines and put some management controls in place in the Walla Walla basin there to deal with the water level declines that are occurring. I suspect long-term that groundwater use in the basalt system there will continue to be monitored carefully so that we can track management tools. How are things responding to reductions in groundwater pumping, if that's what indeed occurs up in the Walla Walla basin there. But it's just too early in the process to know. So I will stop there.
All right, so now we're going to start taking some questions. I see that we have questions in chat. We have quite a few questions in chat. Great. So Alexandra, do you want to do this portion or do you want me to lead this?
You're welcome to lead it.
Okay.
I would just go in order that
Mhm.
we received the questions. And then if we have more questions than we have time, we can provide written responses to questions if we need to.
Yes, and we can always, I don't know if you're okay, we can always stay over a little over time too, if we can answer more questions. Okay, so the first one from Mark, are there technologies that can be used for measuring and reporting that would not require a hard meter on every groundwater PLD? Is there anything else you want to add to that, Mark?
Maybe in conversation, Kelly. Thank you. I mean, the groundwater study used some of the methods that are currently in different technologies. So if they were good enough for the groundwater study, should they not be good enough for users to measure and report, especially with some opportunity for ground truthing?
I'll take a swipe at that, Mark, and see if anybody else wants to join in, Dark or others. So for the basin study, we did use the satellite imagery to quantify consumptive use from the irrigated fields in the basin there. There's a difference between what the satellite imagery measures, which is how much did that particular field consume through evapotranspiration, and what was actually applied on that particular field. So generally, I think most of the groundwater rights in the Harney probably have a total annual volume allotment of 3 acre-feet per acre. And I think Jordan Beamer's work using the OpenET platform there, the evapotranspiration data, indicated a range of something like 2.2 to 2.6 acre-feet per acre of consumptive use. For the consumptive use to equal the water that comes out of the well, we'd have to have 100% irrigation efficiency, which even the best irrigation systems out there, I don't think approach that. They get up to 90% or so. So our approach at this time is to move in the direction of requiring flow meters at the wellheads so we can quantify with the highest degree of accuracy that we can what the actual amount of groundwater that's being pumped from the aquifer system is. If we were to find, I guess, a subgroup of users that are representative across the area of interest where the SWMPA is likely to exist, we certainly could start gathering some data next year and compare that with additional analyses of satellite imagery to see how things correlate. But right now, my understanding is that the irrigation systems are not uniform across the basin, And we would run the risk of introducing error into our assessment of groundwater pumpage if we don't have the direct measurement with a flow meter out there. So another way, I guess, Mark, of asking your question is how much uncertainty or error are we willing to live with? And I don't know the answer to that question. So I'll stop there and see if Darek or others have thoughts on that.
Yeah, Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I will have to say that while we were able to use the satellite imagery to estimate groundwater use, that tells us what's coming off of the field. But then we had to do the next step, particularly for providing input for the groundwater model of transferring that estimated use to particular wells. And I must say that was one of the biggest headaches of this project. And it has been for almost every basin study that we've done for the 30+ years I've been working in this department. And so, the getting a metered discharge out of each well is the best information that we can acquire in terms of assigning how much water is coming out of which hole in the ground, and not only just which hole in the ground, but at which depth beneath the land surface is that water coming from, so that we can more accurately represent where the water is coming from and how the groundwater system is responding to that. We expend a huge amount of staff time and dollars to come at these numbers in an indirect way. And people talk about the cost of the flow meters, but basically we've transferred the cost from the well user to the department and to the USGS to come at these numbers. And because we don't have these direct numbers, people will then say, well, you didn't get a direct number, and then they become critical of the numbers that we do come up with. And so this cuts out a lot of the problems that arise as we discuss the total water use within the basin.
Mark, any more additional questions?
No, I don't want to spend all the bandwidth, but the last comment I would have, not a question, Kelly, is somewhat disappointing that we have an opportunity to work with groundwater users here and technology that's developing. That goes along with House Bill 2018 that the department is currently using in order to figure out groundwater budgets across the state. So we have an opportunity to ground truth this technology that's going to be used broadly for regulation, management, and other things. I think we should look towards that. Yes, Jerry, it's one of the hardest things the department has, so why not try to develop an alternative route? Ivan, yeah, is 5% good, 10% good? I don't know. But as you know, there's probably 10% of every meter that's currently installed that's not actively currently working. So that takes us to 10%. Then we start pumping sand, we start pumping other things. If we had the ability to work with a farmer to understand the efficiency of the irrigation system, what the irrigation type they have, say they have 4 points of diversion, they put a meter on 2 of them, I think it'd be valuable information to the state to refine total groundwater budgets across the state, just not in Harney Basin. So I'll follow up with you guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. So next question we have from Kara Moon. So even though we are working on groundwater rules for the area of concern, if a SWMPA is designated, could you also require surface water users to measure and report? Karen, anything to add to that question?
No, thank you. And I see that it was answered on one of the pages of the presentation. So thank you much.
You're welcome. Okay. John, next question. Since the give back farmers likely don't exceed duty due to not irrigating the entire season, is there any benefit to the huge expense of measurement and reporting?
And I think that's been pretty much answered, that the benefit is accuracy in the modeling, hopefully. I've got to say, I probably agree with Mark that, shoot, even if this was 20% error, you know, we need to start conserving. We need to, you know, people ask me how much water, groundwater have we saved so far? It's like, well, none. We don't know what our target is, but shoot, even if it was within 20%, we could start. We know where we need to save. Weaver Springs, Crane, Highway 20. Let's go on to the next one. I'd be curious what benefits have come from the measurement reporting in Walla Walla.
Yeah, so the main benefit and the reason behind the SWMPA again is, you know, I'll use the term accounting. What we're trying to do is get the best estimate of groundwater pumpage from a particular aquifer system or a sub area of an aquifer system, and then compare that to changes in groundwater levels over time. You know, the main issue that we're dealing with are groundwater level declines in some of the sub areas around the Harney Basin there. And we do not understand accurately how much groundwater use is occurring within those sub areas. We're going to be asked to provide information to the community as to, well, how much reduction in groundwater use do we need to shoulder in order to get groundwater level declines down to some rate, what's reasonably stable. And that's what Justin Iverson and Annette are working on with our kind of our groundwater allocation approach. So we can't answer that question accurately if we don't have a good sense of the correlation between groundwater use in a sub area and then water level change over time. And I don't think, because we'll be talking about reductions in groundwater use, I don't think the groundwater users want us guessing at that or estimating with large margins of error. Again, what we're really after here is the goal of trying to get the most accurate measurement we can. With respect to the Walla Walla Basin, we're gathering data over time, and those data are two things: water use and groundwater level changes. John, I'm not aware that anybody was exceeding their authorized use in the Walla Walla, but I'm not familiar with the data themselves, nor the specific water right issues. I just haven't heard anything from staff that was an issue up there.
I guess, thank you, Ivan. I've got OpenET opened up right now. Look at those areas that we just discussed of, you know, Weaver Springs or Highway 20 or Crane, and see heavy use. We already know the basin is what, over by a huge amount, even in rough numbers. Does it make sense to cut those areas by 50% and see if in 5 years when we do the update, what was accomplished? Just an idea.
No, it's, I mean, it's that's another approach is, well, let's not worry about measurement. Let's just next year, everybody dry up 10% of their acres. And we're going to continue collecting groundwater level data. And then year number 2, let's dry up another 10%. And year number 3, another 10%. And by then we'll start to develop some sense in some sub areas as to how that reduction in groundwater use is having an effect on groundwater level declines out there. I personally would rather have, before we start the reductions in groundwater use, a pretty good estimate of what is the current use. We know what the water level trends are. We're measuring that and collecting that now. We know what the consumptive use was, at least for the period of analysis that Jordan and Melanie did the work out in the basin there. But that period of analysis, and Jerry and Darek helped me out here, I think those data are already 5 years old. So I don't know what's changed, probably not much at the basin scale, but in some of the sub areas, there could have been some changes as to groundwater use increasing. We know folks have been transferring things around and continuing to grow into some of the underdeveloped permits out there.
Okay, that's an interesting idea. Percent. I guess it seems like if we were at least starting to juniors, or if we were doing something like 10% next year and another 10% the following year, at least we would be hopefully making some progress. Currently, all my clients that I work with are just back. They're not going to do efficiency measures because they don't want to spend the money and to put in. We're not saving any. We're not helping the groundwater any yet. That's all.
All right, thank you, John. We have a question from Patty. Where do stock wells fit into the rulemaking? So are you talking specifically about for the SWMPA, Patty? Do you want to, can you, a little bit more clarification?
For the SWMPA, but if you have additional comments, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Patty, stock water wells right now are an exempt use, so they're not covered under water rights. And they generally tend to be small uses, to get after cattle. One of the ideas we've had internally is requiring an efficient use of stock water, meaning you pump it out of the well and you put it in a trough or series of troughs. I've seen examples in Harney County where they turn cows out into fields, they turn the well on, it fills a low spot, and the well runs 24/7 for the 6 months that the cows are out there. That's a fairly wasteful use of groundwater and isn't efficient by today's standards. I'm sure it's cheap and easy to do, and you don't have stock tanks that get shot up either, but that's one of the things that we would be pushing for, is a more efficient use. But there's no intention to regulate stock wells or any other exempt uses out in the basin there as part of these rules.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, those are all the questions we have in chat. Does anybody have any question they would like to ask? Go ahead and raise your hand. Mark, go ahead. If you got more questions, you saw your video pop up.
Thanks. I was trying to find the reaction for the raised hand.
Go ahead.
So Ivan, I know up in Walla Walla in different areas, when you work through the SWMPA, that there's been a time frame for producers to come in compliance, and some of that has been also tied to funds that are available. I'm assuming that'll still be part of the conversation.
Yes, that is part of the conversation, Mark. Interestingly enough, we set aside a fairly substantial portion of our cost use measuring funds back when the SWMPA was implemented in the Walla Walla, and it really actually got underwhelming use. I think some of the landowners had concerns about using government funds for the measuring devices. I hope that's not the case. We have a substantial amount of money available in our cost use measuring program. We got a big influx of ARPA dollars a couple of years ago. So we are able to fund probably up to 75% of the cost of the device and installation costs for folks in the Harney. I really would encourage folks to start working today with DALI, the Water Master. It's a fairly streamlined process. We don't know what the rules are going to look like, but getting folks familiar with the process and understanding, what their responsibilities are and how that would work is going to save us time down the road. I don't know where we sit today with types of measuring devices. That's going to be one of the discussions. We'll need to work with folks like, Matt Nonemacher out there. What has he observed with the sand pumping wells? We don't want anything invasive anymore put into pumps. The old impellers from the old micrometers, they just don't hold up very well and very quickly become inaccurate. So we're looking at more types of strap-on sonic type meters instead, and hopefully we'll get better accuracy out of those over time.
Thanks, Ivan. I agree with the type of metering, and possibly there should be a list of meters that should be acceptable in the basin so producers could understand. Secondly, the other conversation that you guys know that's going to come up is the department has all this data they don't currently use. I'm not saying I agree with that or disagree with that, but what is the platform in which this information is going to be entered into? Is it going to be publicly available? And also, when we talk about volunteer agreements, I do believe the more volunteer agreements that hopefully can come through in the basin, the more detailed and finite the data needs to be. So do you guys have any plan on setting up some sort of way for the community and growers to be able to understand the meters that are being reported and what is actually happening? That was kind of clunky, but I think you know where I'm going.
Nope. Mark, are you getting at the department basically serving up or sharing publicly the water use data that we're collecting out in the basin at some point?
Yes, especially as community members are going to look to entering in volunteer agreements. My view only, is that that should be publicly transparent. That if we're going to allow a user to use X less amount of water per year, that they should be able to see that, the department should be able to see that, and the public should be able to see that in something web page on the department. Yeah, there should be transparency involved, Ivan.
Yeah. Just taking some notes here. No, I agree, I think, with your sentiments there, Mark. Right now, we have not had those discussions. What I can share with you is we have a statewide water use reporting program. Today, folks that report into that are public entities, so municipalities, irrigation districts, utility districts, folks that have water rights and are public entities. They're required by law to send in their water use data. They typically send it in once per year, and it's a monthly value. So similar to what we talked about for a SWMPA. We also, over the last probably 2 decades, many of the water rights that we have issued, and most of those have been groundwater rights, have required the groundwater users to measure their groundwater use and report their groundwater use annually to the department as well. And those data go into that water use reporting system also. Now I'm going to look to Jerry and Darek. I believe the groundwater system, the groundwater section separately tracks, I'm going to say, project related or study related groundwater use in basin. So in some of the existing critical groundwater areas around the state, we require measuring devices and go out and read those flow meters annually or have those data submitted to the department. And those data, I believe, are being housed, I think, separately in the groundwater database system. But we have not, Mark, had time to have discussions internally about really needed modernization of those systems so we can better serve up that information back to the public. It's certainly publicly available in the sense that if somebody wants it and does a public records request, we'll turn it around. There's nothing secret about it. I'm not sure, frankly, how efficiently we could and what sort of formatting it would be for the public to get it. Some of the information is available via our website. So John, you'll know as you get into RIS and you look up a particular groundwater right, if that water right was required to report water use, there's a link or a button on that water right page that will take you to the reported water use in our database system. So the public does have access to that. It's not going to be easily available. They'll have to know the person's water right information and then go find it through a number of steps on the internet. So we have a ways to go to get data formatted and readily accessible by the public, I would say.
And Ivan, I'd share, well, and Mark too, I'd share, it's not the actual numbers, but if somebody goes to OpenET, you know, you can hover your pointer over any pivot and it'll show the amount of water that was used each month for 2022. Pretty, I mean, we all know it's, if that's consumptive use, then that's needs to be adjusted or whatever by the sprinkler system, but boy, it sure gives some idea.
Absolutely right. That's correct.
And they just by hovering over it, like I'm Weaver Springs, and it's showing me, okay, that pivot got 29 inches of water last year. The one next to it was 23 inches. And I can see that it peaked in, you know, July of last year was when they used the most. Very impressive. That kind of thing seems like it'd be very helpful if we're going to go to the detail of measured and reported data. Oh, but I guess if you're only, well, yeah, you're picking it up monthly data once a year, so that basically is the same thing.
And John, I see you added another question in there about self-reporting meters. We're certainly open to the technology. We don't know much about them. You know, municipalities tend to use those where somebody can drive around or they report automatically through some, I think it's a radio transmission. You know, the difference between the city and Harney County is the scale, you know, and I don't know what kind of a communication system would be required for a flow meter to communicate via either cell service, satellite uplink, something like that. And doing that for the probably many hundreds of wells that are going to need to have meters on them. I don't know how cost effective that would be or how realistic it would be.
I'm just thinking it might be more accurate than having 100 or 200 other farmers or farmers helpers going out and reading, not necessarily always the first day of the month or anything, but.
Well, and I think we can talk about that during the, you know, the SWMPA discussion. I'm sure that we're going to have staff available to go out and read flow meters, or at least a statistically significant number of them each year randomly to double check the data that are being submitted. I don't think those will be monthly readings, but we'll probably be looking to get annual totals so we can confirm that the reported data, you know, are accurate to us, or pick up anything for whatever reason somebody didn't report something.
Any other questions? Alexandria, I saw that you came off mute. If you have something to add.
Nope, I was just gonna remind members of the Rules Advisory Committee, as well as members of the public, that you are welcome to submit questions to Kelly or myself via email, and we can provide written responses. Again, we really want to build this foundational understanding around these control tools so that everyone feels prepped and ready to go for the future Rules Advisory Committee meetings. So if you have those questions, again, we want to kind of leave that opportunity open for you to ask those questions, and we can help try to answer those as appropriate. And our next session will be next Thursday, the 17th, and that session is going to be slightly different than the previous ones in that we are doing a hybrid session. So the in-person option will be at the Harney County Community Center. The Harney County Watershed Council was gracious enough to sponsor us to have that meeting venue so that we could have our discussion around voluntary agreements in person with you all. We will still have that virtual option for those of you that can't make it in person. So that session is just slightly different in that sense, but that will be from 10 to 11 a.m. And same goes for the recordings. We'll have it available within 1 to 2 business days for you guys. And I want to thank you all for your time and for attending and your great questions and curiosity, and we will see you next week. Thanks all.